A film clip that often pops up in my feed is the famous courtroom scene between Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. As Cruise attempts to bait Nicholson's character, trying to coax a confession out of him, Nicholson sneers with contempt, "You want answers?" Cruise demands, "I want the truth." And Nicholson thunders back, "You can't handle the truth." I don't do Tom Cruise or Jack Nicholson very well. Impressions is not my thing. We all want the truth, but usually we only see part of it, or choose to believe the part that confirms what we already think. Whether it's RFK Jr.'s specious and dangerous policies, or trying to ascribe blame beyond the shooter in Charlie Kirk's assassination, or if Colbert's cancellation and Kimmel's suspension were for economic or political reasons, people latch onto their sources and cling to their truth. It's a bit like the parable of the blind man and the elephant. One feels the trunk and says, "It's a hose." Another grasps the leg and insists, "It's a tree." Another touches the ear and declares, "It's a fan." Each one speaks their truth, what they know and experience, but it is only part of the story. Only together can they begin to imagine the whole. Tonight on this Kol Nidre, I want to share my truth, my own struggling, conflicted, and competing truths about the situation in Israel and Gaza. It is not the truth, but it's my truth. Yours may be different. Mine and yours may continue to shift, evolve, or change. What is most important for me to acknowledge is that I don't know everything, and that on this holiest night of the year, I must approach this subject with humility. I also want to confess that I don't like talking about Israel on the high holy days. Not because I don't care. You know I care deeply. But sermons don't provide an opportunity for dialogue. And what else can I possibly say that you don't already know or believe to be true, or reject outright? Our discussions, too often lacking layers of context and nuance, usually collapse into binary thinking that becomes divisive. Still, silence isn't an option, especially now. To say nothing when much of the Jewish world, especially those of us in the diaspora, are struggling and in some cases divided, to say nothing would be a betrayal of this day of truth-telling. Earlier in the service, Cantor Berlin and the choir chanted the haunting melody of Kol Nidre that annuls vows we could not keep. This ritual is humbling. We admit that we promise more than we can deliver. Our words fall short. Kol Nidre reminds us that it's hard enough to live up to our own words, let alone God's expectations of us. And yet, the point of Kol Nidre is to move forward with honesty and integrity. Yom Kippur reminds us over and over, I am limited, I have failed, and yet I will try again. 2 years after Hamas's barbaric attack on October 7th, murdering 1,200 people, taking 250 hostages, my conflicting feelings have increased and my attitude has shifted. I've been to Israel 4 times in the past 2.5 years. The first of these visits was in February 2023, during the early weeks of the protest movement against the proposed judicial overhaul. Tens, even hundreds of thousands of Israelis marched in the streets week after week to protect Israel's democratic institutions. After October 7th, many of those same people filled the streets again, this time demanding the release of the hostages, and more recently, demanding an end to the war. I've spoken with families displaced from their homes along the Lebanese border, living in hotel rooms for months on end, not knowing when they'll return. I've met young soldiers who never wanted this war, but who felt they had no choice but to fight in it. I sat behind a family on Shabbat in a hotel dining room. They managed to celebrate Shabbat while their son, Idan Shtivi, remained in captivity in Gaza. Sadly, he was declared dead several months later. His death hit me hard Because even though I didn't know him, my encounter with his family put me in proximity to him, and it strengthened my love and my affinity for the Israeli people. And yet my truth only represents one part. I have not spoken to Palestinians. I don't have Palestinian friends. I don't have Arab partners in our local interfaith work. Missing a thoughtful and nuanced perspective is a loss to me. I follow a couple of Palestinians on social media who share a different perspective than most others, and that appears to be more nuanced and admittedly aligns more with my thinking. But I'm not in conversation with them, not like the many Israeli and American Jewish voices that I rely upon to help me frame and sharpen my thinking. So my truth is incomplete, and I admit it. Yet here are some of my truths. I respond regularly to distortions and falsehoods posted by a few of my Facebook friends. Yet I have not spoken loudly enough against Israeli government decisions and policies that perpetuate suffering among innocent Palestinians. And I have not shown enough empathy for them. And so I'm left struggling. I'm not comfortable in the Israel is always right camp, and that the IDF and that the extremist Netanyahu government can do no wrong. Nor am I comfortable in the progressive spaces that demand I check my Zionism at the door. I mourn every soldier and civilian killed as if I've lost a member of my family. I don't mourn similarly for Palestinians. I should, but I don't. I'm deeply disturbed by the devastation in Gaza. I'm appalled by Hamas's use of non-combatants as human shields and the world's refusal to hold Hamas accountable. I am disheartened that so few Palestinian or Arab voices condemn Hamas with the same force that many Jews condemn Israel. These are my truths, incomplete though they are. Over the last few years, I've leaned and learned from voices I trust, mostly American-born Israeli thought leaders and journalists. Maybe you follow them too. Yossi Klein Halevi, Linda Gradstein, Allison Kaplan-Summer, Noah Ephron, Daniel Gordis, Dan Sinor. All but Sinor are proud Israelis who cast their lot with our ancestral homeland by making Aliyah decades ago. Some are liberal, others conservative, and all are moral critics. They struggle like me, like us. They remind me that true love requires critique even when it is difficult and painful to deliver. They urge us to resist oversimplification and to hold competing truths in mind. Israeli educator and author and senior fellow at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, Yossi Klein Halevi, wrote a powerful and thought-provoking op-ed in a recent Times of Israel blog post. Its title, Our Season of Reckoning, Israel's Moral Crossroads in Gaza, speaks to this time of conflicting certainties. His article spoke to me. He writes, quote, "We know Israel faces a relentless campaign of lies, half-truths, and distortions, but we also know something has gone very wrong in Gaza. He recognizes that the conversations we have in the larger community with those who seek to delegitimize Israel need to be different than those we have internally among our own community. In here, he insists we ask hard moral questions, lest we lose a piece of our soul and our morality as Jews and as Israelis. I invite you to reflect on these three questions with appropriate prefaces that he asks us to reckon with. First, Israel never set out to starve Gaza. Yet why did the government not change course when hunger and famine became clear after closing the borders to humanitarian aid last spring? Second, while the IDF does not deliberately kill civilians as part of its policy, has it done everything to protect them? Has recklessness crept in? Has tolerance for collateral damage, that euphemism for the deaths of innocent, has tolerance for collateral damage increased? And what is happening to rogue soldiers who cross moral red lines and violate the oath they took when they were drafted into the IDF? Lastly, how much of Gaza's devastation is the unavoidable tragedy of war, and how much is vengeance? Is the leveling up to 70% of the structures, as has been reported, and which aerial photos can confirm, necessary for Israel to meet its war goals? And what exactly is Israel's plan for the day after? Is it Trump's path to peace? And will Netanyahu and his government really adopt this plan? Will Hamas even adopt this plan? Who knows? I don't pretend to have the answers, and I know there are competing truths. We may not know until the war ends, but we must ask ourselves these questions. Otherwise, we risk moral numbness. And that is precisely what Yom Kippur demands of us. To resist numbness, to wake up, to ask hard and often painful questions we'd rather avoid. Tonight, as we recite Al-Chet, we confess not only the sins we commit, but also sins of omission, the times we neglected to speak, to act, to notice, to care. My first sermon after October 7th was raw, and I was rightly concerned about losing my empathy. I was angry at that time, of course, and concerned. And 2 years later, I say, for the sin of losing my empathy, I am guilty. For the sin of closing my eyes too often to the photos of Palestinian suffering, I am guilty. Perhaps many of us share the same sentiment. Our hatred for Hamas operatives and the refusal to release the hostages, or negotiate an end to the war, or surrender outright, has led to my heart becoming calloused to the suffering of innocent Palestinians. But Yom Kippur calls us back. It calls us to soften our hearts, to reclaim compassion, to remember that every Israeli hostage is someone's child. Every soldier killed trying to battle Hamas was someone's child, and every dead Gazan was someone's child. The suffering of Israelis and Palestinians is worthy of our tears. The Unatana Tokef prayer asks, who shall live and who shall die? Who by fire, who by water, who by famine, who by sword? This year, those words land differently. Israelis wonder, who by terror, who by rocket, who by war? Palestinians wonder, who by airstrike, who by starvation, who by disease? However, this poem reminds us that we are not powerless. Teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and righteous deeds cannot end war, but they can transform us. They can help restore empathy. They can remind us that truth is never ours alone. I'm grateful that our congregation has not fractured over Israel the way that many others have. However, that may also mean that we are not asking the most challenging questions. At this season of self-reckoning, we need to ask them. Where has our empathy failed? What truths have we ignored? How have our words, our silences, and our omissions affected the world around us? And so we must work to stay honest, to remain compassionate, and to speak the truth even when it is incomplete, and to build a community in here strong enough to hold conflicting certainties and multiple realities. On this night of Kol Nidre, we stand before God and admit our words are insufficient, our promises incomplete, our truths partial. But we do not give up. We gather our fragments together and ask, can we handle the truth? Not all of it, but enough of it to live more honestly, more humbly, and more compassionately. The great Rabbi Hillel famously said, if I am not for myself, who am I? If I am for myself only, what am I? And if not now, when? The time is now. We have work to do. Let's share our complicated truths with love and concern. Above all, let us go forth together, working to return the hostages and the war and regain our moral center. Ken Yehi Ratzon.